So I thought I'd start this video off with the definition, or my definition, of confusion when it comes to this journey of self-development, self-improvement, all that kind of stuff, right? And the definition is knowing that there is a path in front of you, because if there's not a path, then there's nothing for you to really be confused about, right? Because there's nothing, So there's a path ahead. There's a decision to be made. There's a lot of decisions to be made. And that there's a lot of different paths as well, right? But generally, the path is forward. And confusion is when you don't know how to navigate that, when you don't know how to navigate decisions and where is it that you want to go, where is it that you want to go in life. A lot of you, most likely, who are watching this, have already been through a number of hero's journeys, have already been through a number of different mini journeys in life. But now they're approaching something where all the old stuff is no longer working, right? Whether that can be a new job, a new relationship, a new way of looking at life. It's something, it's new territory, right? It's unfamiliar territory. That's what uncertainty is. And confusion is being confused about that. Where is it that I want to go? And it stems from two different ways, right? Two different things. First one is fundamentally, you don't know yourself. And don't worry, you're in good company. Most people don't know themselves. In fact, I would argue that everyone, to some extent, does not know who they truly are, right? So there's nothing to worry about. That's the first thing. Second one is you don't know what the fundamental truth of what life is, right? And that's what we're going to be getting into in this video. So you have these two different areas, right? Not knowing who you are and not knowing how life is, right? So a lot of the times when people are graduating from mainstream self-help, mainstream self-development, right? They've done all this kind of cool stuff. They've done the meditation. They've done some light kind of therapy work. They've also done a ton of practical action taking. Whether that's waking up at 5 a.m. and doing a cold shower, or taking up the gym, doing a martial art, all that kind of stuff. Great stuff. Nothing wrong with it, right? The problem is that only gets you so far. Because the reason why people start looking into my work and doing work with me is because what gets you to where you are right now is not going to get you to the next stage. There needs to be a paradigm shift, right? So there's an example I use, or I've started to use, where the difference between how you were as a 5-year-old and how you were as 15 years old is massive, right? Massive change. If there's not, but you probably know a few people who have not been in this kind of change, and it's usually because there's a developmental issue, there's a learning difficulty. If someone's the same mental age as they are 5 years old, right? Or even the same personality, there's a big difference, right? Because society, the way it's set up, is very good at taking you from that journey, from around 5 years old to, graduating into a young adult, right? However, when you speak to someone who's in their adult years, usually this growth slows down. And it's because a lot of the time society is stuck at a very conventional stage when it comes to development, right? And a lot of the mainstream self-help, which if you're watching this, most likely has kind of come to fruition for you and pissed you off, to be honest, because you're not getting anywhere else with it. The reason why it fails is because it's not a paradigm shift. It's still in the act of doing. Whereas what we need to do is move from doing to being. It doesn't mean we get rid of doing, right? So you have a lot of the hippie movement, or whatever you want to call it, right? Or just hippies. It's not really a movement anymore. It's not in the political movement anymore, right? But you have that, you have the woo-woo kind of spiritual new age kind of people, where it's all about numerology and angel numbers and just kind of sitting back and manifesting something on your couch and vibrating that into existence, right? Not very effective, but it also has its place as well, right? Doesn't mean we're going into that. That is a no-go area here. We're not shaming it. People can go through that if you want. I've been through a little bit of a phase of that. I'm sure you have as well, most likely, if you follow this stage, or at least you become open to that idea, right? But we want to get the practicality of the doing stage, of going out and making money, going out and making something work in your dating and social life, or going out and traveling the world and ticking off all these boxes and buying the expensive laptop or whatever that is, right? All that kind of stuff is good. We want to take the practicality and the movement of that, but integrate it with a higher perspective, right? And as most likely, as you're watching this, you're realizing that this isn't just some quick 5-step guides to stop being the nice guy, or 3-step guides to, actually becoming a leader and that kind of stuff. This is looking at everything from a big picture perspective, giving you the principles and the philosophies behind it, and then you can take that and move into what the next phase is, right? And the next phase of uncertainty is certainty, or there's a caveat there, and we're going to get into that. So the first point is, if I can just remind myself what it is I wrote down, right? The first one is you're confused with what you are, or with who you are, right? If there's a path in front of you and you know fundamentally who it is that you are, right now, there's obviously a stage above that, which I will talk about in another video, where you can make the argument that you can't really know who you are, but there's a certainty, at least you know the boundaries of who you are, like the structure of who you are, right? These are my principles. This is how I act in this situation. This is what I want, right? Owning your desires, or owning your beliefs, right? However, this gets confusing when you have been through a self-help journey, or you've been through a personal development journey, and suddenly what you'll realize, and why you're watching this video, is when you've gone internal, when you've done some internal work, you realize that there's not just one of you. There's a lot of different you. There's hundreds of different versions of you. There's different archetypes. There's all this kind of stuff going on. And this is very confusing, right? Because you also realize, just as there's not just loads of different parts of you, they're all at different stages of development. They're all in different ego developments, right? What we would say in developmental psychology, which I'll leave some kind of, I'll go into a whole other separate video as well in my channel, right? You realize that there's so many different aspects of yourself. And at the start, because it's so overwhelming, you treat them all as equal, most likely. You treat them all in the same hierarchy. This is what's leading to uncertainty and confusion, because the same way that you respect a 5-year-old, you treat them as an equal human being in the sense that they are a human just like you, but the same way you don't have them running the country, right? Unless you want that to happen, and then you're probably an anarchist, in which case, this message is probably not for you, right? You don't have a 5-year-old tell you how to run your life, right? But a lot of the problems that we run into is because we have these 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds or 15-year-olds, or maybe even an adult part of you, which sounds really smart, sounds really sophisticated. It sounds like it's telling you all the right things. But then when you look deeper, you realize that it's actually just coming from a place of insecurity. It's coming from a place of fear, right? So there's developmental issues there, and then there's shadow issues there as well. So a developmental issue is when there's a part of you which is locked to the earlier developmental stage. For now, we'll just call this at like a younger age, right? Like a child, All the inner child stuff is becoming very popular, so I'm sure you've heard of it, but it misses a few kind of key distinctions, right? Because there's a lot of different types of children. There's a lot of different types of child. And there's not one overarching inner child which is in charge of all of your inner child activities, But there's an uncertainty in yourself and who you are, right? And what, like I said, causes that is the move inwards, looking inside of yourself. The same way which before you looked at the outside world, I want this goal, I want that, I want this type of partner, right? I want this amount of money. You move that inwards, and you start to realize that just as well as there's a whole complex ecosystem out here, it's also right here, right? And one of the things that usually goes on, right, when you start to have a sense of uncertainty and a loss of direction, is because what was the previous stage really good at? The stage where we wanted to go out and achieve loads of things, or the stage where we wanted to go out and we had a really clear goal. Like for me, I used to train jiu-jitsu 6 to 8 hours a day, every day, for around 6 years. Started off more gradual than that, full transparency, and then a couple of years in, it kind of switched over to that kind of professional level of training, right? And I wanted to be a world champion. And it was a very clear goal. It was a very clear kind of thing of what I wanted to do. So I went to the Worlds, didn't medal in the Worlds. I went to Euros, medaled in the Euros, the European Championships, and medaled at all these national competitions and local competitions and all that kind of stuff, right? So I took it very seriously. But in the last year of that journey, this transition, which most likely you are going through right now, started to happen to me. and I was in denial, right? Again, not knowing myself. Or I was knowing myself, but I was just suppressing it. Again, take a moment to reflect on that. Is that you right now? Where I was piercing through the veil that this goal that I had set for myself was not going to make me happy, was not going to bring me fulfillment, right? So a lot of the times when we move out of this phase of doing, or this phase of doing no longer is appealing to us, it's because something which is called a golden projection, right? So projection is coming from me and placing it onto something else. And a golden version of that is everything that's good, right? So if you want to look at beauty in this world, when something is beautiful, this is a scientific effect. I think it's called the halo effect, where if someone's pretty, right? If someone's beautiful or handsome or whatever, we tend to trust them more and they tend to make more money, right? It's because of this effect, because beauty has this inherent golden projection on top of it, right? We are projecting that all of this amazing stuff onto the attribute of beauty, when beauty is just beauty. That's all it is, right? We do this with goals. We do this with achieving something. We do this with getting to a destination. When getting to a destination is just that, it's just getting to a destination, right? Nothing more, nothing less. Now, there are some destinations which are better or more aligned with us, right? Like getting to the destination of owning a house is better than the destination of becoming homeless, right? There is a hierarchy here. However, when you first get into the stage of realizing that these golden projections are not real on goals or achievement, it becomes very hard for us to differentiate the hierarchy, right? And we become very pluralist. We become very flatland, right? This is one of the biggest things I see in clients about why they are so uncertain. Everything, hierarchy has gone, structure has just gone, practicality has gone, right? And what you have to do here is begin to gently integrate that back, right? So, I mean, with a bunch of my clients, we have a bunch of exercises, mainly around the unconscious, right? Because unconsciously we've done this. This thing has burned us, right? It didn't bring us what we wanted. Same thing with my jiu-jitsu, right? It didn't bring me what I wanted. And, you know, to kind of prove a point, I haven't really trained it properly or consistently since then, which was like about 3 years ago. Obviously, I've been going to the gym and doing other kind of physical stuff, but there's still a little bit of, you know, feeling like it's burnt, right? And I haven't gone in and I haven't actually addressed it because it's not been a big deal for me, right? But one of the things which you have to go and do is really sit with that fear or that pain or whatever that is, and realize that how it was before is not how it's going to be in the future, right? Just because something burned us in the past doesn't mean that if we integrate it back with us, means it's going to burn us again, because it's integrated now with a better perspective. That yes, this goal is not going to save my life. I'm not going to, you know, become a celebrity, or like becoming a celebrity or making all this money or getting this girlfriend or whatever it is going to make me something which I can't already give myself. No, of course not, right? However, I would still want the direction. There's nothing inherently evil about direction. And if that's the direction that I want, if that feels aligned within me, then I'll just do that. But I'm not going to live under the illusion that it's going to bring me fulfillment or satisfaction. However, it can also make that easier, right? So that's the first point. Integrating back practicality in a more holistic way, right? Second point, uncertainty in life in general and how life in general works, right? So life, newsflash, can't be controlled, right? It's impermanent, you know? So when I was living with this Buddhist nun, me and a few of my other peers and my other mentor, I was living in Poland, of all the places to live with a Buddhist nun, right? Living in Poland and then in Hungary for about a year and a half, right? She was teaching us the Dharma as she was dying of stage 4 cancer. And she was not afraid at all about death, which on one level is very inspiring. I'll definitely make a video about that, right? But she was able to not be afraid because she understood the nature of reality, the nature of life, right? Which is everything is impermanent. And it sounds very obvious, or maybe it doesn't sound obvious, but at least if you've been in these circles for a while, you've heard that like we only have one, you only live once. Every man has 2 lives. The second starts when he realizes he only has one, right? All these kind of good kind of stuff. But how many of you have actually reflected on that? That everything is impermanent, that everything is changing, right? What it does is in some ways it causes suffering. So in Buddhist philosophy and thought, in the Dharma, there's 3 characteristics of suffering: anicca, dukkha, anatta, right? And it's in that order. So anicca is the Sanskrit, not the Sanskrit, the Pali word for impermanence. Dukkha is the Pali word for suffering or unpleasantness, right? I can't remember the exact translation, but there's also not an exact translation to English. And then anatta is no self, right? So when you realize everything is impermanent, suffering arises. And then when you realize those 2 things, then anatta arises, no self, because you realize those 2 characteristics, right? There can't be a self if everything is impermanent and everything is suffering, right? Anicca, anatta, dukkha. Or yeah, that could, it might be in a different order. I'm a little bit rusty, as you can tell, when it comes to that, right? However, when it comes to looking at the world in this kind of way, a lot of the suffering around uncertainty comes from the fact we are trying to control it. It comes from the fact that we are not only trying to control it, but we're trying to predict it, right? I want you to just take a moment right now and think back to any time in life, right? And then think back to before that, just a little bit before that, and ask yourself, have I ever predicted what's going to happen into the future with exact detail? And the answer to that is no, unless you're clairvoyant or have some kind of superpower, right? Which, fair enough, right? Please teach me. But unless you have that, like excluding all of that, you've never done that. So why are you trying to do that now? Because let me tell you right now, it's not going to work, right? And when we try and get certainty, when we try and really find out what's going to be around the corner, it just leads us to being more stifled, right? So, I mean, for me, with jiu-jitsu, right, it led me to be more stifled because I trapped myself into jiu-jitsu thinking that, well, I've come all this far. I know what's going to happen on this journey. Again, I know what's going to happen on this journey when I didn't, right? So that's preferable than quitting and seeing where that leads me. Now, if I didn't quit, I wouldn't have met my other mentors and this Buddhist nun, Sister Kama, and I wouldn't have, had this successful coaching business with guys for the last few years. I wouldn't have known any of that. However, when I first quit, or when I first stepped off the plane to go and just see my mentor for what was only supposed to be 10 days, right? Turned out to be 3 years later, here I am, right? I didn't know what was going to happen, and I was okay, right? So in your situation right now, what I want you to do is notice, are you trying to control what's going to happen? Am I trying to predict what's going to happen, right? And if the question is yes, then I have or the answer to that question is yes, then I have a bonus exercise for you right now, right? This is like a classic exercise. So what I want you to do, get out some pens and papers or a laptop or whatever, and start to write down what is it that you're afraid of. Because uncertainty, if you're watching this video, uncertainty isn't the issue. It's the fact that you're afraid of uncertainty, right? Because everyone has uncertainty. Every single person on this planet has uncertainty in their life. Whether they live under the illusion of certainty or whether they live under the illusion of certainty is a different matter, but everything is uncertain, right? And a lot of the times, very successful people, or people that you look up to most likely, are much better at dealing with that uncertainty than most likely you are right now, and that's okay, right? So how do we make the uncertain certain? Well, we take a moment and we write it out. What is it in my situation that I am most afraid of happening? And take a moment to write that, right? Obviously, I'm not going to have like a 30-minute break here to have you write that out. But you can pause the video, you can come back to it, do it later. But really write that out. Because what this exercise does is it makes the uncertain certain, or more certain, or it makes it at the very least clear, right? Okay, these are the actual situations that I am afraid of. These are the actual events that I am afraid of coming to pass, right? So now you have that written in front of you. first of all take into account, do I now feel as afraid? And the answer to that question most likely is no. Because uncertainty is where our mind really comes alive. It kind of kickstarts, right? The mind isn't evil. Ego is not the enemy. It's just trying to help us, right? So when it feels uncertainty, it's like, okay, let me get this figured out. Well, now you have these examples in front of you, right? Around what it is that you're actually uncertain of. Now you can actually create a much better action plan about how it is that you want to proceed, right? So now you have this. Now you have these, events that you are afraid of, right? Now comes the most important question, which is, am I prepared to accept these or not? And only you know the answer to these questions, right? Am I prepared to say, yes, I am willing to make this decision and willing to have this happen? Or yes, I am willing to not make this decision and not have this happen, right? And from there, this is all I can lead you for in this video, right? To this point, because only you can answer that question. What this has done is given you clarity about where you are and what decisions you are that you're running away from, and what events or circumstances it is that you are most afraid of. And from here, from this clarity, you can decide, is this fear either stopping me, or is it protecting me? Is it doing whatever, right? But at least now you know. Now you know, okay, let's say I want to go and I want to quit my job. I'm not saying you should, right? What am I afraid of? Being homeless or being homeless on the street, right? Most likely you didn't actually put that down. It's probably more to do with, being embarrassed about being seen as unemployed by your friends or your family, right? However, is that circumstance worth it to get what else you want, which is the second phase of the exercise, which is, okay, I have this thing. Is the opposite of this, i.e. quitting my job to go and pursue my passion, right? Super cliche, whatever, we'll just work with it, right? Is that risk worth it, right? Okay, if the answer is yes, then you know what to do. If the answer is no, then you know what to do. And then there is always another option, the third one, which is, what is the compromise here, right? Between safety and going after what I want, right? Because a lot of the time, what we're trying to get out of right here now is this, mental masturbation, right? When we deal with uncertainty, mental masturbation is always, always, always the biggest thing. Because when we're uncertain, like I said, the ego and the mind kicks into overdrive in order to help us, protect us. But because we're not certain about what we're uncertain about, we don't know what we're actually uncertain about, what the actual events are, because we haven't wrote them out or we haven't actually looked at it properly, then this never stops because we don't actually know what we're afraid of, right? However, with this, it does stop. This is where we are. Okay, now how do we move from here? So after you do that, I want you to do that and then put in the comments below if you want some feedback about what you've done, about what the next step is, and I'm happy to give you some feedback. This is also just one small part of a 12-week program that I do, a 3-month program that I do together one-on-one with people. This is much more of a practical kind of homework that I would give to someone depending on their circumstance, and maybe be much more personalized, right? And there's an unconscious component of that, which is diving deep into unconscious blocks and beliefs that are holding us back, right? Or this golden projection is an unconscious belief as well, which we talked about earlier in the video. There's a conscious part where we talk much more about developmental psychology in relation to you, how that affects you, how to work at the stage that you're at in a way which is most effortless and most easy. And it's then also informed by Buddhist practice, philosophy, and thought, which is about developing mindfulness in a very ruthlessly practical way, where mindfulness isn't just something which we sit on the mat, sit on the cushion for 30 minutes, we cultivate mindfulness and we feel better. That's great, but we actually bring it into day-to-day life, second to second. So we no longer get caught in loops which either bring us down or bring us too excessively up, right? Because then it just creates an up and down nature of life, which is really quite stressful, right? So we do that in relation to what your goals are, as well as just, practical homework advices and that kind of stuff, which we just went over here. So if you're interested in that, there's a link in the Calendly below, about a 20 to 30 minute chat with me, where we can just kind of see where you're at and see where you want to go. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I think will be really helpful for you. Let me know how it goes for you in the comments. I'm happy to give you some kind of feedback, and obviously if this is helpful, subscribe and press the bell button so you know when my videos have dropped. And yeah, thanks for watching.